Thank you for joining our live webcast today. First of all, a couple of logistical items. All participant lines will be muted throughout this presentation. However, please just send questions via the chat window and we'll address as many of them as possible at the end. We will also post a link to the presentation and the link to the recording so you can share it with your colleagues. I'm Wendy Sosmowski, Senior Director of Marketing at Jobvite. We're very fortunate today to have Jessica Lee with us to present 7 ways to measure social recruiting ROI. Jessica Lee is an HR professional based in Washington, D.C. By day, she is a Senior Employment Manager for APCO Worldwide, a global communications consultancy where she manages their recruitment activities ranging from pipeline generation to university relations and the employment branding initiatives. Outside of her daytime gig, Jessica is an active and influential member of the HR recruiting social media community, including serving as editor of the highly trafficked blog Fistful of Talent. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Jessica Lee.
Thanks, Wendy, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm really excited to be able to spend some time with you guys talking a bit about social recruiting and specifically about measurements and metrics and whatnot. So we're just going to dive right in. And what I thought I'd start with was, today's webcast isn't really about me, but I thought I would throw in a slide anyways about me because even me, I get tired a bit of, pundits and folks who aren't in the trenches and non-practitioner types who are, teaching recruiting HR folks about how to do their jobs. And me, I'm like you. I'm a corporate HR gal. I've been in the business for about 10 years now, and this is always awkward to do webcasts or webinars because we can't see each other. But that's me last night, literally cooking dinner, trying to finalize slides while things were in the oven. But I'm a recruiter just like you. And, the thing that I wanted to share about me and my background, and I think it's important to note as we kind of dig in and as you guys, are working on your own social recruiting initiatives. But the thing that I think is important to share is that, I'm a corporate recruiter and social media hasn't always been my thing. It's actually something that's newish to me. I only started using Facebook in 2008, in the spring of 2008. I only started blogging a few months later, and then I only got into Twitter a few months later, and this was not really all by choice because I was gung-ho and obsessed with social media tools. It was really because people kind of pushed me and prompted me to jump in, and so I did. And I've been able to figure out, for myself and also on behalf of my company, how to use social media to recruit. And so, I tell this to say that, I haven't been at this too long, which means that if someone like me who isn't actually terribly tech savvy has figured out how to use this partially, that means I think you can too. So hopefully that's a little bit of hope for folks out there that might be hesitant or nervous about jumping in when it comes to using social media to recruit. Okay, so in terms of this topic, and why did I choose the topic of talking about metrics and measurements with you guys, and why are we talking about this today? Well, I personally think that social recruiting, it's evolutionary, and we're probably at this point today where a lot of us have discovered the tools that are out there, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, blogging, what have you, and we're starting to master them, these various tools, and hopefully a lot of us are starting to have fun when we're using social media to recruit. But there's this question of, for what? What are we doing this for and why? And are we even providing value as we do this? And I think at this point in time in terms of the evolution of social recruiting, I think there have been a lot of lessons learned at this point in time by many. So there's no point in going over the tools or the basics on how to use various tools and what their ultimate purpose and function is. So I thought I would take it to the point of let's think of this as social recruiting 201 versus 101, and spend some time talking about metrics and measurements, because you and I aren't doing this as a hobby. We're doing this possibly to make us better recruiters and hire better people and have a better recruiting function. So in order to know whether or not we're getting there, I think metrics and measurements are important. Okay. So before we actually dive in, though, to the actual metrics and measurements, I wanted to quickly run through just some foundational info so that you know where I'm coming from and what my perspective is as far as the world of social recruiting goes. So first, I think in terms of how we should be using social media to recruit, I think today, and at least for me and from my perspective, I think there's 3 core areas or ways in which we can use social media to recruit. And I think there's definitely a lot of overlap between these areas, and I think that they all feed into each other, but I do think that there are kind of 3 distinct ways and different tasks that you might be doing within various social networks or social media channels in order to actually support these 3 areas. So for me, the first area is sourcing, obviously digging into tools like Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn to actually find potential applicants or potential candidates, passive folks, typically who could potentially become candidates for your organization. So there's that sourcing element. I also believe that a big part of it is branding and thinking about it from an employment branding perspective. So using these social tools to broadcast messages and information about what makes your organization a great place to work and what are the things that make it unique and different from other organizations, either within your industry or just more broadly within maybe a particular geographic area. So really putting a stamp on your employment brand using social tools, I think, is a great way to use social media. And then the last piece kind of combines the other 2, and it's really this notion of building out community. I think the people that you source ultimately can become part of that community. I think people may be drawn towards your community because of your branding efforts. In order to sustain the community as well, I think this constantly, broadcasting information as it relates to your employment brand is really what's going to be, the things that help you to build out a community, since you need to have some level of engagement with the folks that you've sourced. So given these 3 pieces, the metrics that we're going to talk about today will apply to different parts of these 3 pieces, and some might apply to all, some might only apply to particular pieces of the puzzle when it comes to social recruiting. But this is kind of where I'm coming from in terms of how we use social media to recruit. That all being said, though, I have to throw this caveat out there, actually a few caveats, because I would also want you guys to know that I don't personally believe that social media is the answer. It's not the be-all, end-all. It's a piece of your recruiting strategy. I don't even think that social recruiting is going to work for everyone. I think there are some recruiters that are better at maybe doing sourcing in some other traditional way and then working the phones, working in job fair and showing their face at industry events. But I think, again, it's not for everyone. It's for some people. I do think that it's still too early to know whether or not social media is the magic bullet or if it's a magic bullet. I think it's a supplemental piece to your recruiting strategy, but in order for us to know whether or not it is the magic bullet, then this is why the metrics are important. So those are my quick caveats. Okay, more foundational stuff before we actually dig into the metrics. So going back to this question of why metrics and why did I think it was important for us to talk about metrics and measurements, I think at the end of the day, what you're trying to do, what I'm trying to do when it comes to my recruiting efforts is really show value. That's the ultimate goal. And when it comes to social media specifically, we're not just doing it for fun. It may be fun, but because we're ultimately trying to show value, we've got to take some steps to really get us to the point of showing value. So part of it might be establishing goals as it relates to your social recruiting efforts. Part of it might be that you're trying to define what success would look like. But in order to do those things and actually map out a strategy and therefore show that you're actually providing value, this important piece of it is determining measurements, establishing metrics, and then measuring. So these are the steps I think that we probably have to take in order to be able to show that our social recruiting efforts indeed are showing some value. So real quickly, possible goals that you might have as part of this path to show whether your social recruiting efforts are indeed providing value. I think these are probably going to be the same for most people. Your goal is ultimately to hire great people, hopefully using social recruiting. You're hopefully wanting to hire great people very quickly using social recruiting. You're wanting to hire great people very quickly while spending as little as you can with your social recruiting efforts. You're hoping to have a strong employment brand awareness, and then also, I think part of this is as it specifically relates to, community and branding, provide great customer service to your applicants and whatnot. So goals, I think, are pretty straightforward. Possible markers of success, and I think, this is really where your metrics are going to get tied into. It's these possible measures of success, and these aren't going to be the same for everyone, but these are the kinds of things that are going to drive your metrics. And there are a lot of different kinds of things that you can actually measure. It's not going to be the same for everyone or for every organization, but you've got to show these measurements have an impact on the goals and the markers of success. So everyone might have different objectives in mind, but these are the kinds of things that we might be striving for when we're looking at improving the recruiting function or being a better recruiter. So it could be, decreasing your time to fill. It could be increasing the quality of your candidates or the quality of your hires. It could be increasing the website traffic to the career section of your website, and hopefully it's coming from social sources. It could be increased brand awareness. There can be many different the markers of success, but these are the kinds of things that hopefully you're thinking about as you start trying to define what your measurements and metrics might be. Okay, so now finally to the actual metrics and measurements. Let's jump in. At a macro level, I wanted to start there. There for me are probably about 7 or so metrics or measurements that you should be considering when it comes to your social recruiting efforts. Now, not all of these will apply to you. Not all of them will apply to your organization. It really depends on, what your markers of success are, what your goals are, and then establishing metrics and measurements accordingly. And I think also part of this will, the answer for, what measurements or metrics should I use, part of it will depend on what social tools you're actually using. But at the end of the day, I think 7 core measurements is what we're looking at. And I like to make a distinction, as you can see, between qualitative and quantitative metrics, because I think that they are different, and how you wrap your head around these various metrics and measurements will differ based on whether the measurements are qualitative or quantitative. And the quantitative ones are pretty straightforward, I think easier to understand. The qualitative, not so much, but I think particularly with social recruiting and with social media being so new and it's sometimes a little bit fuzzy for some folks to understand, the qualitative piece is very important. And we'll probably spend more time talking about qualitative than quantitative as we get through this webcast. So, okay, diving into the first one, eyeballs and traffic. I think this, can be pretty straightforward, but what this is really about is trying to figure out, as far as whether your social recruiting efforts are working or not, are people looking at and paying attention to what you're putting out there? So, specifically from the perspective of using social recruiting as an employment branding tool and as a community building tool, if it's successful, then, eyeballs should be there and people should actually be visiting your pages and whatnot. But I think the tricky part about eyeballs and traffic is that you might have to measure levels of traffic in multiple places. So with this screenshot, for example, the screenshots that I show here, these are traffic levels both to my company's Facebook careers page and then also to one of the blogs that I write for, because these are both tools that we use for getting our brand out there and engaging and connecting with candidates who are part of our community. So I have to track separately traffic to my blog from how I track traffic to my Facebook page. But again, ultimately the goal is, of course, to see an increase in traffic. That would mean that, we're seeing some success, but you have to do it in a little bit of a disjointed way, which can be a little bit tricky. If you don't want to go in this disjointed manner, I think these are, all important things to measure. Another way to think about eyeballs and traffic is ultimately, what your goal might be is to get applicants to your company's website and the career section and getting them to actually apply for jobs. And so if that's the ultimate goal, what you might want to do is think about measuring eyeballs and traffic just for the career section of your website. So I use Google Analytics in order to do that, and what you might want to do is think about digging deeper into your website's analytics and really paying attention to not only the level of traffic to particular sections of your website, like the career section, but in addition to that, what you'll want to pay attention to and think about tracking and measuring is the referral sources. So are people arriving to the career section of your website because they've clicked on links from your Facebook page, from links that you put out there on Twitter, from links that you see that you put out there on your blog if you have one? That referral source is really a key measure for trying to figure out, are the social recruiting measures that you're taking really even worth it, or is it maybe an SEO campaign and things of that sort that are really driving traffic to the career section of your website, or is it job advertisements and things that you're putting on job boards that's really making a difference? So it's really that the referral source in addition to just the level of traffic that you'll want to pay attention to. And if you're just focusing on, eyeballs and traffic for the career section of your website, this might be kind of an easier way to capture and assess overall whether or not your social recruiting efforts are making a difference. So eyeballs and traffic. And of course, again, the needle wants to constantly move upwards with increases in traffic to your social sources. But eyeballs and traffic, pretty straightforward as a quantitative measurement. The next measurement that I'd want you guys to think about and consider as a possible tool to figure out whether or not you're getting value from your social recruiting efforts, this one's kind of pretty straightforward as well, but it's simply comments and mentions that you're getting out in the web in terms of opportunities at your company or what the company culture is like and things of that sort. So this, again, applies for the most part to your broadcasting efforts, so things related to employment branding, and as a result of potentially a strong community that you're building. But one of the results, hopefully, that you'll see in a metric and a measurement you'll want to consider is simply people commenting or mentioning your company or you specifically as a recruiter. Some of this can be gathered individually, and you might be tracking number of Facebook comments that you're getting on your wall. It could be that you're tracking number of comments or mentions or replies on Twitter. Or you might want to aggregate all of this and use a tool such as Social Mentions. Social Mentions is a tool that I like quite a bit to aggregate and figure out, in general, how often are people commenting or mentioning your company and the employment experience or the interview experience and things of that sort. You'll notice with certain sites, or as you start gathering numbers of comments and mentions, that your metric and your measurement might strictly be confined to number of positive comments and mentions versus negative comments and mentions. But that's just a decision that you'll want to make as you think about how to measure this as a possible measure of success. And there might be negative comments that you receive out there if someone has a poor experience or if they're declined for a job and they're upset about it. But it's just something to think about in terms of whether you measure comments and mentions in totality or just positive comments and mentions where you break out negative ones. Me personally, hopefully most of the commentary and the mentions that we receive or that my company receives are positive. But I'm also the kind of person who's of the belief that all PR is good PR. So because of that, I'm more inclined to measure in totality just total number of comments and mentions, because I think all press is good press. So okay, next quantitative measurement or metric to think about. This one's pretty straightforward, but it's simply the number of friends, fans, or followers that you might have. And this could be with your Facebook page, this could be with your Twitter feed, this could be number of members within perhaps a LinkedIn group that you might have, or if you have a blog that's dedicated to careers or information about careers at your organization, it could be the number of subscribers that you have to that blog. But pretty straightforward. It's number of fans, followers, and friends. And obviously, if you're seeing success in your social recruiting efforts, you'd hopefully see an increase in the number of followers, friends, or fans over time. I will say, though, that while the number and while we're looking for over time an increase in the number of fans, friends, or followers, I think the numbers do need some context, though. So if you're a small to mid-sized company, you're obviously not going to have tens of thousands of friends or fans or followers. It's really about the quality of these friendships that do matter, but hopefully it's an increase that you see over time. And when it comes to the quality of these friendships, and that being important, we'll kind of touch on that with some of the other metrics in a bit. But in general, it's an easy measurement or metric to tackle number of friends, fans, and followers. And obviously, you want to see some progression with that. So the next and last quantitative metric or measure that you want to think about is cost. And I think primarily that there are two things to think about when you're using cost as a possible metric or measurement for your success in social recruiting. I think the first is simply an investment of time and the amount of resources that are put towards social recruiting efforts. And I think this is actually where you'll see the biggest cost. It'll be the biggest investment that you have to make, and it's simply, the time that you or your team has to spend to both monitor what's being said about you or the recruiting or the interview experience at your company, and then also it's the time that you actually spend in engaging with people that you're trying to source or potentially have as part of your community when you look at your social recruiting efforts. So the time that you spend and the resources that staff put into social recruiting efforts, that can be a little bit tricky because there aren't a ton of hard costs. It doesn't cost much, and in many cases it's actually free to set up a Facebook fan page or set up your Twitter feed and things of that sort. So it's this investment of time, and how do you measure this, and how do you measure whether or not the efforts that you're putting into it are successful? There are sites that you can use and applications that you can use that will actually measure how much time you spend on Facebook, how much time you spend as an individual on Twitter or other social sites. And it's an interesting but somewhat disturbing, I think, tool in order to actually be able to see how much time you're spending. But, again, in order for you to know whether or not it's worth it and how much time is being spent and being able to quantify that, you have to be able to tell how much time is being spent. And you may see an increase or decrease over time compared to how much you're spending on something such as a media buy or job board spends and things of that sort. But it's really a comparison that you have to make and a metric that you have to be cognizant of as you look at, how successful are your social recruiting efforts, if at all. So this investment of time, and then this other factor related to cost again is, hopefully over time you may see lower spends as far as media buys and job board spends. And, a simple, easy example that I can make and share with you guys is, within my industry, there are industry publications such as PR Week or PR News, and, traditionally these sites, put out an annual careers guide. It's like a printed brochure, or actually it's like a mini magazine that people within the PR industry turn to figure out what are benchmark salaries within the industry, what are the kinds of job opportunities that exist, how is the landscape of careers with the industry shifting. And I think, like you'll see with many industries, there's always the opportunity for companies within the industry to advertise, take full page, several page layouts to share information about careers at their particular company. And spending, thousands of dollars every year is something that my company has typically done in order to make sure that we're front and present in such a guide that's going out to professionals or industry. But past year, we've actually made a decision not to invest thousands of dollars in this printed publication because we really feel like there's more value in our broadcasting efforts as it relates to our employment brand within the social space rather than in a hard printed guide. So, that's an example of where you may see costs decreasing, and then we're also, for my organization, seeing our costs decrease as far as job board spends go because we're having stronger, robust pipelines that are getting built up as a result of our social recruiting efforts. So cost is something that you're going to have to measure over time, but it's not going to be an easy, quick metric for you to be able to determine whether or not there's value, but again, measurement over time where you should be able to see an increase and decrease in certain areas, which therefore drive and answer the question of, are you providing value? Okay, so we're going to switch gears slightly and talk a bit about some of these qualitative metrics. And before we even talk about the specifics, I wanted to spend just a quick spend a quick moment talking about qualitative metrics in general, because I think, before I got involved in social media and social recruiting, this notion of qualitative metrics wasn't something that I was really able to easily wrap my head around, because I don't come from a marketing or advertising background where I think in some situations people are more comfortable with the notion of qualitative metrics. So to help you guys wrap your head around qualitative metrics, I want to share with you, an anecdote that someone shared with me who actually came from the advertising world to help me understand the value of qualitative metrics. So, you might know that in your heart of hearts and in your gut that these social recruiting efforts are worth it, particularly from a branding and a community perspective. You know that it's valuable. You know that it's going to make a difference. You know that engaging and connecting with individuals in the social web is going to be a great thing, but how do you actually prove it? Well, I think, a good thing to think about and a good parallel to draw with qualitative metrics is, like, if we think about Coca-Cola as a brand, for example, and the idea of using a celebrity spokesperson to help enhance the brand and maybe draw more people into it. It's hard to actually put a value on what it's worth to have a Kate Beckinsale or this gentleman from Twilight, whose name I can't remember, but the value of having one of these individuals hold a can of Coca-Cola in order to show people, yes, this is refreshing, this is great, it's young, it's hip, and you should drink it too. Of course, these people are probably paid to do it, but how do you figure out what's the dollar value of actually having them do this? It's hard to put a number on it, and it's hard to put your finger on what that actual value is. But you know that there is some value in it, and you might not be able to measure it in a very scientific or quantitative way, but you know that it works, and you know that it's effective. And here you have several examples right in front of your face of celebrities drinking Coca-Cola, and this being really effective. So we know it works. It's more based on this gut feeling, more qualitative, but it's something that that's important. It's worked for ages in the advertising space, and so I really believe that it's going to work for social recruiting efforts as well. So first, qualitative metric. I want to talk about influence. Influence and why it's an important metric. We'll just kind of dive right in. I thought I would share this study that was done recently. It was actually done by a competitor of my company who put a study out on the value of influence and why it's important. And they did a poll with consumers and asked the question, where do you turn to for buying recommendations when you're in the market to buy something new? So regardless of whether it's a new microwave, a new car, a new pair of shoes, maybe when consumers are looking at recommendations and help in making their decision of what to buy, you'll see as you look through this chart that 83% of the folks that were polled, who are all consumers, turn to the opinions of their friends or an acquaintance when trying to figure out what they should buy, or is it going to be the right purchase. 75% turn to refusing newspapers and magazines on our TV, and you can see there's just a heavy reliance on the recommendations of other people. And really what this boils down to is a trust factor and people being willing to make decisions based on trusted sources. And I think if you think about things from the perspective of your brand, your company's employment brand, or positions at your company being a tangible product or item that you want people to buy into, if you think about things from that same perspective, then this same notion should hold that consumers, so consumers, aka job seekers or candidates or applicants, that they're going to want to turn to their friends or acquaintances or people that they know who are trusted sources about their decision of whether or not to buy into it or not. So influence is really, really important, and I think when it comes to social media, you have the potential to be influential and be seen as an influential person in the community when it comes to jobs in your industry. And if not you, potentially it's the influence of people that you've brought into your community who can serve as advocates or ambassadors or evangelists on behalf of your organization. So like in my situation, I can think of some young professionals or even individuals in college, folks who are influential within the PR space who I've built relationships with, who are now serving as advocates or evangelists on behalf of my company. And I think in the same token, also think about your own employees as potentially being folks that you can leverage to be influential on behalf of your employment brand and whatnot. Tracking influence, though, is a little bit difficult. And again, at the end of the day, we're talking about here how to measure how to measure and the metrics that are important as far as your social recruiting efforts. So tracking the level of your influence and the broadcasting efforts that you've made as far as your employment brand is a little bit more tricky. But if you have influence, what you know is that the information you broadcast is going to be spread far and further than others. If you're influential in this space, you know that people are going to trust what you say, trust your opinion, and get the word out on your behalf. But again, measuring this influence on your own, I don't think it's easy, because I think it's, as an individual, it's hard to tell how far is this tweet getting that I've put out there, how many times has it been retweeted, or how many times is the content that we put out there, maybe on our blog perhaps, how often is that getting repurposed, and is it moving in the direction that you intend for it to move, which is ideally towards, folks in your community or industry that potentially can become applicants or candidates. So I think in order to track influence rather than going at it on your own, there are a lot of great tools that exist to help you be able to track whether or not you are, as an individual, are influential, or you as an organization, your brand is influenced. So there are tools out there like a tool called Clout or other sites that I'll kind of share at the end that have algorithms that they've built up and created in order to track and determine whether or not an individual or a brand is influential. And again, if you think about this graphic that we were on a few slides ago in terms of, who do consumers trust, the person that they trust most is, their friends. That's the opinion that they're going to trust the most. And so in the context of your recruiting efforts, whether it's to build a community or for your employment branding, in order for you to be influential and have influence and get people to trust you, what this means at the end of the day is that you've got to become the friend of these individuals that you're trying to recruit and woo at the end of the day. And so in order to be their friend, it's, again, about engaging, which we'll talk about in a bit, but because it's such an individual activity and it's a metric that a lot of times is going to be tied back to you as an individual recruiter, you might have to use these tools like Clouts or otherwise in order to track your level of influence on an individual-by-individual basis versus as an entire company brand or as an entire recruiting team. So it's individuals that may be influential rather than a brand on the whole. Again, influence, a little bit of a tough metric to track because it is kind of ambiguous, so turn to the services and tools that are out there, rely on their algorithms that they've created, but still an important measure because you know that if you're influential, people are going to buy into and trust what you're saying. Next, qualitative measurement or metric is this notion of engagement. And my apologies, this slide is actually, I think there's some issues with what you might be seeing. But so when it comes to engagement as a metric, let's kind of take a step back and, if you're using the quantitative metric of eyeballs or traffic, you're getting people to your Facebook page or your blog or the career section of your website. That's important. But in order to take it to the next step, an important measurement is how engaged are these people that you have who are visiting your sites to potentially consider you as an employer. I think with engagement, the thing that I would want you to know is that it's an important factor, but I would not want you to be too discouraged when you find that your engagement efforts may be, the level of engagement that you see with your community members isn't high, because I think what's typical is that you'll usually see a 99 and 1 model where, let's say you have 10,000 Twitter followers, let's say as an example. What you're probably going to find is that 90% of those Twitter followers are going to be lurkers. They're going to kind of sit back and just kind of follow, observe, and see what's going on, but they're really not going to engage too much. With that 10,000 Twitter followers, 9% you're probably going to see as intermittent contributors. They might retweet here and there. They might reply occasionally, but they're not hyper engaged. For 1% of your followers, fans, or other individuals where you see that their eyeballs are landing on your various pages, it's that 1% that are going to be highly engaged where you're going to see a high level of interaction, and it's that 1% that you'll probably see is highly influential as well. So I don't want folks to get too discouraged when I think about engagement and some of the specific metrics. That's kind of, I think, something to set you up in terms of knowing what to expect as far as engagement. But engagement is still, a very important metric because, again, when it comes to influence, people turn to others to figure out, what's the strong opinion out there, what's the right opinion to have, and whatnot. So that's gauged based on levels of engagement. So specifics as far as what are you actually trying to track and measure to see whether or not folks are highly engaged, and does it therefore mean that your social media recruiting efforts are valuable? Well, I think there's some questions that you want to ask yourself to think about how engaged are folks. So the measure specifically as far as engagement goes might be how many people join in on a discussion that you've put out there. So let's say if you have a Facebook careers page for your organization and you pose a question to your fans or followers about what's their favorite thing about working at your organization, or what do they wish they could learn more about as far as the employment experience at your organization, you would know that people are highly engaged and there is a level of engagement and hopefully an increased level of engagement over time based on how many people actually join in on that discussion. Another measure of how engaged folks are could again be the number of positive comments to negative ones. So if you put a question out there to ask people, your fans, friends, and followers, what was the interview experience like for you at our organization? Hopefully the number of positive comments would trump the number of negative ones, which can also give you a sense of how engaged your community is as far as your employment brand and the employment experience for your organization. Another measure of engagement could be the number of likes that you get. So like on Facebook, you have the thumbs up option, or it could be the number of retweets, or if it's an email campaign that you've set out, the number of forwards that you see folks are making could also be another measure of engagement. And then the last piece related to engagement that I would recommend is thinking about the length of time that people might spend on your website or on your Facebook page, because the more engaged they are, the more time they're obviously going to spend clicking around, reading information that you put out there, and learning more about your organization. So length of time might be something that you measure through something such as Google Analytics, and you might focus just on the career section of your website to see how long are you able to hold people's attention as far as learning, absorbing, digesting information about careers at your organization. So engagement. Engagement is another one of these things where it can be a little bit tricky, though, when it comes to tracking, because some of it you'll have to do separately. You might have to track length of time on your website through Google Analytics, the number and quality of interactions on your Facebook page within Facebook, but then also you might have aggregators such as the tool Social Mention, which I keep bringing up, which aggregates things nicely to give you a sense of how engaged people are. Okay, so I think we're actually getting towards the last qualitative metric or measurement, but this is really focused on IQ. And I think the easiest way to think about it is, as you connect with candidates or applicants, there's this, I think from an anecdotal perspective, I hear this quite frequently in interviews where people say, oh, I read online that you guys have this program and I want you to tell me more about it because I'm really intrigued and it drew me into the organization. Or you might hear people say, oh, I was on the Facebook page and I saw pictures of, the London office and it looks really modern and I think that's somewhere that I'd ultimately like to work at some point in time. What you're looking at trying to track and measure is an increased level of IQ on the part of applicants and candidates that you interact with. And then in addition to that, an increased level of IQ from a recruiter's perspective in terms of knowing more about an applicant or candidate. I know that there's an argument out there about, should you be Googling applicants and candidates and how legal is it? I think putting that aside, and we could probably do a webinar on that another day, I think this notion of just simply elevating the level of IQ and increasing the amount of intelligence on the part of recruiters and candidates is key, because what I personally see is that as people come in for interviews, if they've gone out to our Facebook page or they've read my blog, they have a higher level of intelligence. The kinds of questions that they might ask are a little bit more in-depth, and we can kind of skip some of this basic stuff about, well, what's the culture like at your organization, or they know, how my approach as a recruiter might be as far as making a job offer because they've read information on my blog. So IQ as a metric is a little bit harder to measure. And the thing that I would suggest maybe thinking about is using tools such as Zoomerang or focus groups or polling tools in order to ask community members or hires that you make about the level of IQ that they might have gained because of social sources. So you might put a poll or a survey out there to contacts and to folks in your community to ask, are social media channels providing you with higher levels of information about the company or the culture or the experience? Did it help better prep you for interviews? Or also among hiring managers and recruiters, polling them to find out, are candidates who came in through social sources, are they more prepared? Do they know more? And really just kind of gathering all these anecdotes to figure out, are they learning more through social media, and is this making them a better candidate, or is this making the interview experience more richer or more sophisticated? And also this notion of polling, focus groups, surveys, I think you can also apply this towards, tracking levels of engagement and what's the level of quality as far as your engagement efforts go. So asking questions about to applicants, is the social media experience that is being provided from a recruiting perspective, is it quality? Are they getting, are they getting levels of engagement from recruiters or hiring managers that they enjoy? Is it enough? Do they like your participation? I think questions that fall along those lines are going to be really helpful in terms of getting a sense of how successful are your engagement efforts, and is there an increased level of IQ as far as your social recruiting efforts go. Okay, so 7 different ways to potentially track your success as far as your social recruiting efforts. And along the way, I've mentioned and thrown out a lot of different measurement tools that exist. The good news is that I don't think there's a shortage of tools out there for you to be able to track your social recruiting efforts. I think the thing that can be tough is that, it's a little bit fragmented and there's a lot of different tools out there, and pulling things together in a comprehensive single dashboard can be a little bit tough, so it's a little bit manual at times. But again, the positive is that there are a lot of tools out there to help you with tracking how successful your social recruiting efforts have been, and therefore giving you the ability to show your organization that you are providing value. So lots of tools to consider and lots of different metrics to consider. But hopefully, you're finding that there are going to be a lot of resources out there for you as far as metrics and measurements go for your social recruiting efforts. So I'm going to take a pause because I know that I've been chatting away, and hopefully this has been a lot of great information. And we're going to open things up into questions in a bit, but I know that Anne from Jobvite is also going to hop on now and share with you a little bit about some of the really exciting and interesting things that they're doing on the metrics and intelligence front. So I'm going to take a pause and turn things over to Anne.
Thanks so much, Jessica. It was great to hear all of those tips and really practical advice for everybody. We're really excited to do this webcast today because this is a topic that is near and dear to our hearts at Jobvite too. And we realize it's, it can be very complex for people to do this on a daily basis, and we've been working hard to continue to make that an easy part of your recruiting technology that you can use every day. So I just wanted to share a couple new things from Jobvite that might be interesting to the people listening. If you haven't taken a look at our products before, and I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what they are. We have a recruiting platform that covers 3 basic tasks that you're doing in your recruiting and hiring process: finding candidates, managing a whole process, and then finally knowing what works with the metrics and intelligence that you need to analyze your results. What that means are 2 different products that we have. One is called Jobvite Hire, and that's our complete applicant tracking and recruiting product. And the other is Jobvite Source, which is our social sourcing and CRM product, which also recently won the Top HR Product of the Year award from Human Resource Executive magazine. The 2 products have in common social recruiting and employee referral. They have in common recruiting intelligence, which I'm going to talk more about, and the middle component is just which process you need us to manage for you in terms of the technology, whether it's applicant tracking or just the CRM and sourcing side of your process. So either of these products has the kind of technology that we're going to be talking about here for metrics and measurement. One of the issues that Jessica alluded to is that there's a lot of information out there that you need to be tracking. And it's great to have all of these opportunities of ways to get in touch with candidates now, but it can be really harder than ever to tell what works. And as you know, trying to bring all that data together, figure out what's going on, it can be a real issue, especially since sometimes you're not even getting data that's right, depending on the technology setup that you have now. For example, if you're counting on candidates to identify how they first heard about their job, studies have shown that they are highly inaccurate at being able to identify that. So this is a challenge that technology can really answer for you. So at Jobvite, before we get to all the great metrics, we want to start with the fundamentals and help you start with stuff you can track. So no matter how you are putting out the word about your job, whether it's in social networks that we've been talking a lot about today, or whether it's through more traditional means, job advertising, or any way that you put your information out, we build automatic trackable links into every piece of job information that you put out. And as we know, this job information is forwarded around a lot between different people and places on the web. And you can see on the right that we're tracking how that job information is passed around on the web. So when you finally get an application, you know where that originated. Was it a job ad? Was it an employer referral? Was it a post that you did on Twitter? So start with information that you can track. And wherever you are on the web. So with Jobvite, we help you distribute your job information on Facebook, through email, Twitter, LinkedIn, or those traditional places. As you can see, each of these has a hot link that is appropriate to the social network or the place that it's in. It looks like it's at home there, and if someone passes that on, the information will be automatically tracked without cutting and pasting, and a lot of different manual processes that introduce errors and end up not giving you the information you need about what's working in your process. Now recently, a couple of days ago, we've just introduced a whole new look at this data, and our intent is really to give you the tools to very quickly see what's working in your process of recruiting and hiring. What that means are several components: a personalized recruiting dashboard, which I'll show you a few shots of, really understanding how your sources are performing throughout the pipeline. So not just what's bringing in applicants, but then what sources are bringing in quality applicants that become interviews, good enough to be interviewed, and then the hires, and being able to access that information whenever you're going about a search to see what's the right source for the search you're starting now. And that, as I mentioned, covering all candidate sources. Social recruiting is an area that is tough to track, and we've made a real point at doing that, but we also cover all of the traditional sources so that you have one view of all of your data. And career site benchmarking is something that Jessica just mentioned too. We provide a lens into that from one interface so that you can see everything all at once. So for example, in terms of the actual type of metrics that you might be looking at on a daily, monthly basis, depending on your role, less or more frequently, you could be looking at the traffic to your website, to your career sites, referring sites that your career site is getting traffic from, how many views, forwards, and applications certain jobs are getting, the sources of interviews and hires. And you can look at all of this information through a filter of different criteria that you can set with a click of a button without going through complicated reporting. You can look at this information by job category, say by marketing or engineering or accounting, by the particular job, by a geographical location, by a certain social network or source. So when you take a look at your dashboard, I'm showing an example right now, you can imagine any of your sources being displayed in this type of data format and then being able to quickly change what you're looking at through the filter and getting all the detailed information that you need to see how effective those programs are and really what your pipeline is looking like for the jobs that you're trying to fill. Here's an example of some of the career site metrics that you would see on your dashboard. You can see an overview of visitors and the gray little benchmarking line below there, which shows you how you're doing relative to other career sites, and the sources of your traffic and referring sites. So that's just a quick snapshot of the type of data that we're talking about. But another key element is really that qualitative part that Jessica mentioned, and the human component is huge there. And what technology can do for you is make it easy for you to increase the engagement throughout your company. And at Jobvite, we have a belief that hiring is everyone's job. So we've built our recruiting platform, whether you're using Jobvite Source or Jobvite Hire, we've built this platform to be used by any employee in the company who can help with putting out the word about your jobs. And what that means is you have a huge level of leverage when you do that. If you as a recruiter have 500 contacts, just imagine how powerful a network of employees is. If you have 1,000 employees with 200 contacts each, that's a huge network. If you can effectively reach them and engage them to involve their networks and then help you get the referrals that you need for the jobs that you're working. And that's really creating your own social network and using it to the benefit of your company and finding the talent that you need for your jobs. Of course, there's a great cost impact of doing that. And we never forget that, even when we're talking about those great engagement metrics. Of course, employee referrals, as we all know, are great quality and a lot less expensive. So if you can even replace a few of your traditional method hires with getting more referrals through technology like this, you're looking at a big savings, plus the advantage of having that quality talent on your team. But finally, I just wanted to close with a quote from one of our customers who is a big believer in engaging his entire company in the recruiting process. And Total Attorneys has seen benefits not only from recruiting and being able to hire more people through referrals, but a really positive impact on the overall brand of the company, because they have this belief that involving employees and enabling them to speak genuinely about the company and the brand really is creating positive buzz about the company as a whole, not just about working there. When an employee believes so much in their company and wants people to come and work there, that says something wonderful to the rest of the world about that company and the product that it's offering. So it's really a virtuous circle, and the leverage of having your employees involved in your recruiting can go beyond even the recruiting benefits to impact the company as a whole. That's the end of our presentation for today. I want to thank Jessica again for joining us, and I want to make sure that you see her contact information here. She's very open to questions, and of course Twitter followers and blog readers and commenters, so I would encourage you to get engaged with Jessica and get engaged with Jobvite as well. I've also posted a link to see a tour of the Jobvite products that we've been talking about. So we'd love it if you came by our website and took a look at any time. Thanks so much, Jessica.